This is the story of a man with incredible wealth. We often say that, money buys happiness. So to feel happy and fulfilled, you've got to be successful. Well, a man called me one day from New York when I was still living in Philadelphia, and he asked if he could come down to Philadelphia for treatment. And he said that he was very wealthy and powerful, and that he owned one of the companies on the New York Stock Exchange. But he said he'd never had a happy minute in his life. And so I said, sure, that sounds really sad, and I'd love to work with you. And I gave him I said, if you want to come down from New York, I could give you, say, a 2 or 3 hour appointment. So rather than going back and forth from, for once a week for an hour, we could have like an extended session and maybe do something all at once. And he liked that idea. So he flew in his private plane from New York to Philadelphia, where he was met with a stretch limousine. And he got in the limousine with his bodyguards and handlers and drove to our hospital, which was at the time the Presbyterian University of Pennsylvania Medical Center. It was actually a small neighborhood hospital in a kind of gang warfare area. It was a very, very poor area. We were 6 blocks from the University of Pennsylvania, and we're kind of affiliated with that hospital, but our clientele were, for the most part, people who were quite poor, people who couldn't read or write. A lot of our patients hadn't made it through the 5th grade, so it was, that's the kind of place we were working. It was actually a tremendous joy. This has nothing to do with the story, although it does have a little something to do with the story. But it was a joy working with those people because they had hearts, and they really appreciated when we were doing something for them. But at any rate, that guy came, and he parked his limousine right in front of the hospital. And then he had his bodyguard standing at attention outside of the car while he came into the hospital and took the elevator up to the 5th grade where my clinic was. And he sat down and he explained how hopeless and discouraged and ashamed and inadequate he felt because he said he had incredibly severe shyness and social anxiety. And he said that he was so shy and afraid of people that he couldn't even stand being with his wife or children because he was so anxious, and he was afraid that people would discover that he had this flaw of social anxiety, so he was always trying to hide it. And he felt incredibly ashamed, and he said it was a nightmare, Thanksgiving or Christmas or holidays, and said everyone would come to his house, and I'm sure he lived in some tremendous, wealthy, fantastic house, but he would have to fake it and pretend to be interested in people, and kept hoping, that no one would discover his shyness and his inadequacy. He said the only time he didn't feel shy or anxious was in a board of directors meeting for his corporation. And I guess it was a pretty big board of directors, and he'd be sitting there directing everything, and he had all the power and control, and so he loved doing that. That was his only situation where he wasn't anxious. But he said he'd had this problem ever since he was a little boy, and he felt hopeless, and he wanted to know if there was any hope for someone as severe as he was. And I don't know if you've ever had something about yourself. It could be shyness, it could be something else, some kind of defect that you're ashamed of. But a lot of us do, and have something we're hiding from other people, thinking if they find out, they're going to judge us and look down on us. And it's a source of tremendous unhappiness for tremendous numbers of people. Well, so he asked me what I thought, and I said, well, I have something I want you to do, a technique that might be helpful to you. I said that shame can only exist when something is hidden. And so I want you to open up and start telling people about your shyness. And specifically what I want you to do right now is there's a kind of a subway train that there's a train stop just a block from the hospital, and this is a kind of a commuting train that goes underground and then above ground. But most of the people who take it are people like from this neighborhood. They're not the fanciest people. And I want you to go over and get on that train, and I want you to ride on it for a minimum of 2 hours. And when you're on it, I want you to go from person to person and sit down and introduce yourself and tell them that you're a very wealthy, powerful man from New York, but that you've never had a moment of happiness in your life because you're very shy and you're afraid of people and you've been hiding it, and that you've decided, and that you're just incredibly ashamed of yourself and you feel defective and unworthy, and tell them that you've decided today that you're not going to hide it anymore, and that you're just going to open up and tell people and see what they think. And then after you've told each person, then go and sit down next to someone else and go to a new person every 5 or 10 minutes for at least 2 hours. And he says, oh, no, I can't do that. And this is one of the common things about anxiety. One of the treatments is facing your fears, facing the devil you fear the most. And sometimes you discover that that devil had no teeth. Sometimes you have to be pushed to do the very thing that you don't want to do that might lead you to enlightenment. And he said, well, I can't possibly do that. And I said, oh, yes, you can do that. You know how to walk. You can just stand up out of that chair, walk over to that train station, get on the train, sit down, and start talking to people. And he says, no, it's too frightening. I'll screw up. I can't possibly do that. This is not the kind of treatment I want. And I says, I may not be offering you what you want, but this is what I'm offering you, and you can do it, and I insist that you do it right now. And if you don't want to do it, you can just walk right on out of this office. I won't charge you for the session today, and you can get back into your limousine with your bodyguards and handlers and just go home to New York. But that's what I'm offering. And that's what you must do if you want to work with me. And so he got kind of angry and anxious and tried to persuade me anything but that. And I didn't give in. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to do it. And so I was very curious to see what would happen. And he came back about, 2.5 hours later. And he walked into my office and he was sobbing. And I said, why are you crying? And he said, because I just had the most amazing experience of my life. And I've found joy and connection with other people for the first time. I said, tell me about it. I said, well, I sat down and with people, and they looked like they didn't have much money, and they were kind of, struggling and, working to survive. And I told him my story, and he says, you can't imagine how kind and loving they were. Instead of judging me, which I thought they'd think I was a weirdo, they seemed to love me, and they told me about their families, and they were encouraging to me, and they said that what I was doing was a great thing. And I really felt close to people for the first time in my life. And I said, I'm just so happy for you, and now you know the rest of the treatment. You can do that yourself too. You don't need me anymore. You only needed me for about 7 minutes, I guess. And but now when you go back, you tell your wife the same thing, tell your kids the same thing, just be open with everybody. And he went back to New York. I never saw him again. He called me from New York and said he was just on a high. And he said, God bless you. You changed my life. And so anyway, that's my story, and it illustrates a few things. One is that even if you've struggled with anxiety, feelings of anxiety or feelings of depression for a long time, or like many, if not most of my patients, for your entire life, there is hope to change your life and overcome those negative feelings and to go beyond, not just to become less anxious or less depressed or less ashamed or less angry or less lonely, less inadequate, but to catapult yourself into a state of joy and enlightenment. The second point is that sometimes that can happen rapidly. Not always. Some people have greater resistance, take a longer period of time to change the way they think and feel. And there's a third incredibly important teaching point, is that when I'm working with people, I'm working on two levels. One is to change the thoughts that are often distorted, that cause your anxiety, depression, shame, guilt. And of course, this gentleman's thoughts was, if anyone finds out about my flaws, they'll judge me, they'll laugh at me, they'll scorn me. And he did an experiment that took courage to find out if that was true. And he found out that that was not true. And here's one more point of the story of that man from New York. We often think that we have to have some treasure, some incredible value, money or property or super intelligence to be happy and fulfilled. And it is true that you do need to find treasure for happiness. But here's the interesting thing. His treasure turned out to be his flaw, the one thing that he was ashamed, that he was hiding from other people, his insecurity, the fact that he was afraid of people, the fact that he wasn't good enough in this social realm. That was his treasure. And he was hiding it in the closet, and when he accepted it and brought it out into the open, that's when he achieved enlightenment. And that was a life-transforming moment, but it took tremendous courage on his part. Motivation is very, very important. But in addition, we often tell ourselves, I'm unhappy, feel inadequate, inferior because I'm not successful enough. I'm just average intelligence. I haven't made a lot of money. I'm not changing the world. So how could someone like me feel happy and fulfilled? And that's one of the self-defeating beliefs I call the achievement addiction. And sometimes people have that belief plus perfectionism, saying, not only must I achieve to be worthwhile, I must achieve great things, or it doesn't count. If I fail or screw up, then I'm a loser, then I'm worthless. And this man's story underscores something that I've been teaching for my whole career, but it's hard for people to believe, is that power and success and achievement are not guaranteed paths to happiness and self-esteem. It comes from quite another source. And I believe that every person, including anyone who's watching this right now, is also capable not only of changing the way you feel, but actually experiencing enlightenment. And the technique that helped this man will undoubtedly be different from the technique that helps you. I've developed over 140 techniques to help people who are struggling with negative feelings and self-critical thoughts, upsetting thoughts. So anyway, thank you for listening today. Stay tuned, and there's a lot more where this came from. Thanks, and I love you all, and until next time.